Based on your previous experience, and not just on what Ken said, of course, but how many of you, of all the threats that face humanity and the planet today, how many of you would rank corporations as sort of number one on that list? Okay, that's a fairly large voting majority. The issues then that we want to talk about is partially what the 9/11 issue involving and the corporatist issue, and which is a sort of a political conversation and a legal conversation. But one thing I would like to inject in this today, which is one of the things that our missing audiovisual was supposed to do, was try to bring this into a more planetary and more organic and a more biological perspective, to think about what corporations really are and how they function. And this should lead us both to understand some of their strengths and some of their dangers, and also to some of the vulnerabilities that we might be able to exploit. Because the idea of the corporation right now is not very clearly defined in most people's minds. And you even find a lot of people who have been fighting against them their whole lives who don't actually know what it is they're facing, except unless they have a trademark on top of it. These guys are against Nestle, these guys are against Monsanto. They know the personal history. They know the sort of collective accumulation of atrocities that this particular corporate entity has committed. But when you ask them what it is they're fighting, well, I'm fighting Monsanto, of course, and all the horrible things they've done. But when you look at them, you see talking heads, and you see huge accumulations of money, you see vast arrays of lawyers, and you see an extraordinary amount of biological and social and environmental damage. But what is the actual nature of the thing that's causing this? And so I'm going to try to walk a slightly dizzying two-step here between some biological ideas and some political ideas, and see if we can make this more clear in people's minds about what it is we're actually facing and how to fight them. And to go back to the 9/11 issue, though, if you remember, one of the few true things that Bush and Cheney ever said when they were campaigning was that they were going to run America like CEOs, that they were going to manage the country like an efficient corporation. Now, a lot of people thought that was attractive. A lot of people who had rather more respect for private sector efficiency and the absence of corruption, perhaps, and the absence of just sort of a parasitic bureaucracy. But when you think about when you promise to run a country or any society like a corporation, you are essentially promising them tyranny. Because there is nothing within the corporate framework that allows for anything equivalent to democratic choice, human rights, or even human autonomy. And so when you say, we're going to run this country like a big corporation, you know the Bill of Rights are gone. You know your secrecy is in peril. You know they can look in your pocket, in your bloodstream, in your bladder anytime they want to. So you realize you've entered a whole new realm of reality. And at that point, if the efficiencies, so-called, or the profits, or the whatever it is that's supposed to be the end point of this, you realize that there's been a huge existential, environmental, and even spiritual sacrifice that people have made for this one particular value. And if that value is security, or if that value is profit, it doesn't make any difference, because all of these other issues are externalized and therefore put at threat. And that's basically where we are. They delivered on their promise. America right now is becoming one big, hard-ass, tyrannical corporation. And it has a lot of complicated interlocking boards of directors, and we don't actually know who's in control at any particular time, but we know that between the defense industry and the pharmaceutical industry and the petroleum and the coal industries, all these guys got a seat at the table. It's like when the Godfather calls in the other dons from around the country to report on what's going on in their sector. And all of these individual industries have their representatives, their lobbies, and they pay in their share to the central bank. And So that's where we are. But if you look at it, they've also got the media at that table.
That's right.
And increasingly they have the schools at the table, and the prisons at the table. I mean, this is a fairly comprehensive takeover we're in the midst of here. And if you look at us as rather fragile, little freedom-loving, peace-loving bipeds, and, hairless mammals at that, we don't stand much of a, if I was a gambling guy, and I looked at the odds about us against that, 1,000 to 1 would be generous. So we've got to learn how to redefine the situation, because we know damn well after 50 million years of evolution, we are not designed to go down like this, right? We have fought so many social battles, just in the last couple centuries. But we do have this incredible history of actual evolution. And the country started badly. The Democratic placard was up there, but we all know how hollow it was. But we filled in a lot of the blanks along the way. And a lot of people have given their lives in every respect to bring us to today. And it's just, I've seen too many Hollywood movies. It just doesn't end like this, okay? So we've got to sort of move a few steps into history and figure out how we won. Be able to tell the future history of our success. What kind of factors had to feed into this to make us powerful enough and smart enough to basically turn this back. And it's a formidable challenge, and because almost on all the standard areas where we can attack these guys, they're covered. They're used to being attacked there since they first went after personhood. When, as Ken was saying, when they went after personhood in the 19th century, they knew that if they could get constitutional protections, if a corporate person could not be, his privacy could not be violated, okay, if he had to have the same due process, if he had the same freedom of speech as a real human being, with their coffers, with their resources, they could overwhelm the political system eventually. And that's exactly what's happened. These persons now have taken all of our rights and they've multiplied it exponentially with the rights of property, of wealth, and of media power, and lawyer exuberance. They essentially have clutcher control over almost all of our social and political processes at the moment, and virtually total control over both our political parties. So again, it's a dim view. But if you think again, what the hell is a corporation? And part of the thing I wanted to show you was sort of a view of the planet from about stratospheric height. What it actually looks like from the level. There's one quick digression. The most empowering film I've ever seen in my life, and I think everybody should see and give it to their kids and their friends, is a 40-year-old movie from a guy named Charles Ames, who was a designer in California. And he made this movie called The Powers of Ten. And it's sort of a cult movie, and maybe you've already come across it. But it starts actually right here in Chicago. A guy laying on his back in Prospect Park, and the camera focuses on the back of his hand and starts to move out to the edge of the universe, increasing 1 power of 10 in distance every 10 seconds. It takes about 3 minutes at this rate to get to the edge of the universe. But you see it backing away from the Earth until you can see the entire Earth, backing away from the solar system, backing away from the galaxy. And the speed of it is just hypnotic. And the visuals that he created before computers back in the 60s is also hypnotic. And he takes that, turns it around, and drives it right back into the guy's hand, so it goes down the other direction. So now he's looking at the level of the cell, and now the level of the molecule, and now the level of the atom, and now the level of the quark. So this entire spectrum of time and space, okay, from absolutely everything to the smallest entity in the universe within us, okay, is represented in this 10-minute film. And if you try to wrap your mind around it, as they say in California, you suddenly realize that we are an absolutely magically improbable presence in that spectrum. The fact of, because there's no, this isn't religion. This is pure science. Every level. You cannot deny the galaxies. You cannot deny the solar system. You cannot deny the scale of the Earth, every level in that movie is real as we know it and absolutely necessary to our existence at this moment. We are not more important than our atoms. We are not more important than our molecules. And we are certainly not more important than the solar system. And neither is the solar system more important than our atoms, because it could not exist. The interpenetration of this and the scale of this just is absolutely breathtakingly inspiring, because we're so frigging insignificant, we must be sacred. When you look at us from the upper scale, and when you look at us from the inner side, from the scale of the quark, where life moves along at a nanosecond speed, our lives, our existences are a virtual eternity relative to our constituent elements. So I can't convey verbally what this movie tries to convey, but it is a way to look at the power that we potentially have, because what it brings you to is the fact that consciousness and the way we conceive of things is such a huge part of reality. In other words, reality is a plastic thing. It's not something we come up, face, witness, suffer from, and die. It's something that we're creating at every single moment. So how we envision things, how we theorize things even, makes a difference on how things actually function in the world. So if we look at corporations, or if we don't look at corporations, which is what's happening now, we've all, not we all, but a fairly large majority of us here have agreed that corporate entities are not only important in the world, but they're virtually ruling it, and they're one of the greatest threats we face. But we go out on the internet, and internet in the universities, how many courses, how many forums, how many discussions are focused entirely on the nature and function of corporate power? We all recognize this as the most important thing that's going on, but you go out into the academic universe, you go out into the blogosphere, there's a handful of websites, but that's it. And among thousands, there's probably more websites devoted to these orphan diseases than they are to the fact that corporations have taken over the universe. So that gap is something that we can actually deal with. And with the kind of vision that we bring to that, and the way we get into people's consciousness, that's the blessing of 9/11 in a way. Because the crowd that did it so badly that even people like us are eventually going to be able to reveal it. But can we give the people who receive that revelation enough courage to act on it, and enough tools to feel that they can realistically defend themselves and prevail? And that is the issue, because I don't know how many of you have been in this game for how long, but waking people up, I've found, with a lot of people, is always a two-step affair, okay? You start to talk about the actual facts. You talk about the evidence. You give them beautiful explanations and things like Professor Jones did last night, or David Ray Griffin does. And people start to lean into it and say, wow, wow, wow. And at some point in that leaning in, they make the connection about what the implication is. Because it's not just a bunch of bastards in the White House. It's not just this little gang of 4 or 16 or 32. It suddenly repercusses out to everything that's happened in the government, everything that's happening in the media to this day, and everything that's supporting the status quo. And that is too much to bear. Because we really have not been educated to be citizens. We've been educated to fit in those corporations, and we've been educated to obey, to go along and get along, and a lot of us have learned that as second nature. Okay, the education system for an employee and for corporate terminal incorporation is far, far different than what it would be for a citizen. Citizens are supposed to stand up, and they're supposed to stand up for themselves, they're supposed to stand up for their families, they're supposed to stand up for their communities. And that was originally, and this goes back to the biological thing. And this is going to start to sound sexist at first, but bear with me for a second. Standing up was originally a phallic verb, okay? It was something you stood up for. And actually in places like India, the old days, the kings could only rule as long as they were able one day a year to walk down the main street of town with a full erection, okay, with everybody watching. That was a sign that there was spirit in the kingdom, the king was fierce, and we were protected, and the Lord was with us, okay? Every year they had these things, and when he couldn't get it up, it's time for the new king, okay?
Where was this?
Huh?
Where was this?
This is all across northern India.
Really?
Yeah. I'll get you some stuff on that if you're interested. But the idea, I mean, testosterone has gotten a very bad rap in recent years, and it's actually one of the things I think that is lacking from the body politic at the moment that's getting us in so much trouble. Because if you look at the real studies on testosterone, it's not about violence, and it's not even about domination. Most of the violence they found is caused by people who have low testosterone because they have low confidence. They get upset earlier, they get fearful quicker, and therefore instead of trying to engage or even just walk away, they get into these honor fights. Okay, the idea that if you have a full complement of testosterone, you're basically just confident and self-assured, and you are not afraid. Okay, it creates this sense of well-being, absence of fear, and actually increases the feelings of fatherhood in men too. Now, it's got the sexual side to it. But all it means is that people do not want to be dominated. And so if you try to don't tread on me, the kinds of signs we were putting up in the American Revolution, it was something that you would not accept subordination, to be insubordinate. And that's how far we come. Insubordination now is considered a crime in the armed forces, and it's considered sort of a sin in general society. Insubordination is the cardinal virtue of democracy. I will not be subordinated to another being. I will voluntarily cooperate. We can do everything together, but thou shalt not sit on my head, and thou shalt not tell me what to do, and thou shalt not dominate my life. I mean, we should all basically have big flags flaming with insubordination is our major goal. So when that becomes a sin, the corporate conditioning has already come a long, long way. But when you think about what a corporation is, and this gets back to Ken's stuff, say today I was passed out like $100,000 checks to everybody in this room, okay? And I say for 1 year, you've got to come back and sit in this room, and we all got to sit and think and work together to focus on different parts of reality with only one question in mind. How can we rake money out of that? Okay? We can look at the sea. How can we take money out of the sea? What is the quickest, fastest way to extract profit from that? How can we take it from the forests? How can we take it from the minds of children? How can we take it from the insecurities of our fellow men? Where in there is a profit? Okay? And that's all we want you to think about, and that's all we'll allow you to think about. And anything you think about outside of that in terms of empathizing with what is the victims of they're coming out of these processes, okay? Anything you think about, say, how you might bring your own spiritual or ethical values into that, this is forbidden. We are just focusing your attention on this one goal of making as much money as possible, as quickly as possible, and everything else is going to be cut off, okay? Now, I think there's enough intelligence in this room that if we did that for a year, we could become really, really dangerous people, and we could cause a lot of damage in the world. And we could probably rationalize it. Well, I don't know if we could. But there are ways to rationalize it. If we don't do it, somebody else is going to do it, And we can take that money and we can spend it for good progressive political causes. But there are a lot of people within the corporate membranes that are functioning on this basis, okay? They don't have any human rights. They don't have any freedom of speech. They don't have any privacy. They don't have the luxury of making policies that might benefit their grandchildren. They are just focused on shareholder profit. And that's all they're focused on. And they say, well, if I wasn't in there, people would make maybe worse decisions, or if I can take some of that money and I can send it to Greenpeace. There's all these ways that keep people inside because people in America have a fairly high nut every month. And suddenly you find yourself pretty high off the ground in a corporate environment with kids to support, mortgages, educational stuff, and people can get rationalized into almost anything. So the fear of losing that kind of position, the fear of, because when you're educated for corporate, when you're educated for incorporation, you find out you don't have many talents here in your hands. You can't function by yourself very well anymore. You've got to be a part of a team. You've got to be a part of a larger body to make the kind of money it takes to survive. We don't educate people to be craftspeople or tradespeople or independent practitioners anymore. We educate them for interdependence in a very negative way. So against that background, we have to start to think, what's an education system of the future going to look like? How do you educate people more for independence? How do you educate people more for insubordination? And how do we start to look at these corporate bodies as essentially antithetical to everything that we have thought we've stood for and dreamed for in our evolutionary aspirations? I mean, this is a huge issue. And this corporatism thing, I think, is revolutionary in a way, because we start to see corporations as organic elements in the universe. All of our attention in this room, going back to the earlier thing when you were all enslaved here for the money, the main evolutionary power, and the main power of social progress is not just our intelligence or our knowledge, it's our focused attention. And I spent about 27 years in the East, and the most important thing I learned there was that they have, you guys know it already over here, it comes over, the idea of ki or chi, like Aikido or the power of chi, that mostly comes over in martial arts kind of ideas and stuff like that. But it's the energy that circles through the body. It's the energy that they treat in acupuncture and a lot of the Oriental therapies. But in Japan, they figured out that all of that energy that's circulating in your body, which is connected to your immune system and your testosterone, by the way, because when that energy starts to fade, one of the first things to go is your libido, and the next thing to go is your immune system. So this level of energy is considered very important therapeutically in people's lives. But the Japanese figured out that this energy is connected to the outside world through your senses. In other words, key for them in the outside world is a thing called attention. Okay? And we use attention all the time, but we don't think about it. They thought about it. They thought, when you get a lot of attention, you get a lot of energy. And this is this peculiar kind of energy that informs your whole body and enlivens your whole body. And that's why a lot of people, like Hubert Humphrey used to say, when I'm really sick, if I can get my way to a podium and I can build up a huge shouting crowd, I walk away like a new man. And politicians and the maestros at the head of the orchestras and the symphonies and stuff like that, it's amazing. These guys never die. They just go on and on and on. And they've got these libido problems, too. Even the preachers, they get up and they're preaching the Bible, but they're filling up with this energy. And then you got, groupies out back. You talk to people from the 60s. If you were a groupie and you were going to go out and bang a rock star, you didn't want him on Wednesday afternoon. You wanted him on Saturday night after the concert, okay? After that whole crowd had just filled him with energy. There is an actual dynamic here. And when you say pay attention, when you think about it, it's the same vocabulary we use for currency, You're paying out attention, and somebody who's receiving it is receiving something of value. And when two people are paying attention to each other, they are connected in a very intimate way. Their consciousness, their being is really bound together. And that's what, like in perfect sex. It's a total intermingling of one person's attention and so deeply into another's that they know what the other is feeling, so the excitation of the other feeds back into their excitation. So it is a completely intermingled thing. I mean, this is different like from sex. There's power sex where, you get off because somebody else is doing something you want them to do. But this kind of sex, this kind of adult sex, has to do with you become a single unit. You become a single awareness. And when your own ego breaks down, that is the first time most people, I think, other than, religious experiences or really powerful rock concerts maybe, where the borders break down between you and the people around you. That can happen, obviously, most easily between you and somebody you love. But once that happens, you know what it feels like. And all of a sudden, the concentric rings of empathy around you can widen. You can feel what this person feels, and then feel what that person feels, and start to feel compassion in the widest possible sense. And when you think about compassion, that is the most important thing we have for healing everything around us, being aware of the pain around us. Whether it's compassion to the people or the other species or whatever. However far we can extend that, I think will be known as a measure of our evolution as an individuals and as a culture. So trying to bring that back into our education system, how the attention that we focus on things and where we put it seems to me the most important part of our entire economy. And the most important part of our sociology and psychology. And yet it is almost totally underrated here. And again, when you notice something is terrifically important and terrifically underrated, you start to think there may be a reason. I mean, there's a reason we're not studying corporations everywhere, because they don't really want the inspection that close. And if you start to look at how attention functions in society and who controls it, and what a huge industry it is, how are we going to divert the attention of the public away from this particular set of crimes toward this particular set of celebrity scandals or this particular set of baseball scores? How attention is moved around in society essentially will tell you ahead of time where that society is going to go, where it's going to evolve to. And if you look at ours now, it's just all over the map because it's not focused on anything that's really important. So trying to understand our mass media in terms of the direction and management of our attention, I think is really, really important right now. And that's why what Peter Phillips, I think, is doing with the Project Censored is trying to show everything that's been swept under the carpet and not just, hey, look what you missed here, but try to illustrate the dynamic of how that distraction goes on and how to educate the youth to look behind the curtain and see where we are actually going.